Hi, I'm Gary White for Central Kentucky Television. I'm in Harrodsburg, and I'm here with Bill Huston, who is the former president of St. Catharine College, now a retired president, right?
I am, Gary. I retired at the end of June and working part-time now, but don't have to worry about the things that you don't want to work with.
That's right, exactly. But you are working with stuff you want to work with.
Oh, yes.
And we've been talking for a couple years. You have had a lifelong, pretty much, interest in trains, right?
Right. I got my first layout when I was 4, and I've added to it ever since. But really got heavy into it in 2007 is when I built the garage behind us and got big time.
We're going to get a chance to see his collection that's in the garage. And also upstairs, do you still have that train that you got when you were 4?
I do. Santa Claus made sure I took good care of it, and it's upstairs and running right now.
Great, and we're going to get a chance to go upstairs and see some of those trains as well. Now, all the trains are Lionel trains, right?
Right. I've got 2 kinds of trains. I've got the O gauge and O27, which people my age grew up with in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And then in the 70s and 80s, I got into HO. Those are the smaller ones. And I've got those at a different location. I've got almost 5,000 of them set up down at Harrington Lake. But this is the O and the O27 here in Harrodsburg.
Now, also, you are on the board for the Kentucky Railroad Museum, correct?
Right. I'm the vice chair of the Kentucky Railroad Museum board, and I've been associated with them for about 4 years now, down in New Haven, Kentucky. So, the Lebanon branch of the L&N is very important to us, since that is 20 miles of what we operate with now, and then on over to Junction City, and that's the part that's even taken up. We have some relics from there.
Now, also, you'll see on the sign, Mr. Huston here is the supervisor and engineer, but you also have an electronics assistant or engineer, right?
Right. Willard Ham has been working with me since 2007, and where I may have some strengths, Willard has other strengths, especially in electronics and electricity end. So he helps rebuild some of the old trains that we find in auctions and flea markets and stuff, and he's also an operator that's been doing with trains since the 1950s.
Okay. Well, let's take a tour. We're going to start down here on the bottom part of the garage.
Okay, that'll be fine. We have some antiques down here from all the way back to about 1880 up until maybe the 1950s. And when I set up the trains, I wanted to get a couple of old lanterns and stuff to put around the walls, and then that led to some calendars and times tables and tools, and eventually the garage filled up, both upstairs and downstairs. So we like the railroad antiques just as much as we like the trains that you'll see in a few minutes.
Great. Well, now we're inside the garage, and we're going to get a chance to see some of the antiques before we actually head upstairs and see the trains themselves. And we're looking at, when people think of railroads, they think of the trains, but there's actually a lot that goes into making them all possible. Well,
to have a railroad, you've got to have it well maintained, and you've got to build it, and it's constant maintenance from then on. So what you see before you here are some of the typical tools of the trade. These range from about 1880 up until about 1940. Different types of shovels, rail straighteners, rail stretchers. We've got kerosene pots that they put under the switches to keep them from freezing up in the summertime. We've got a spade up here that they use to smooth the gravel and the ballast out. And you've got some typical signs that you might see. This one came off the Illinois Central Station. Man will not clear the side of the car. Lots of different hats and hard hats. This one here, this L&N hat, belonged to Fabian Cameron from Springfield. And Fabian for years was an accountant with the L&N, and he went up and down and did a lot of their books. He donated his hard hat and his briefcase to the little museum here. Then you also see many of the wrenches and tools of the trade back in that day. Before you, we've got about 12 railroads represented in these. All of them are engraved and by the railroad. Even the paintbrushes were engraved back then. This is an old station desk. This came out of Fulton, Kentucky. This was an Illinois Central and Illinois Central Gulf depot. They eventually merged into the Illinois Central. But you would have the typical stamps and the inkwells and the pencils and all the accessories, the lanterns and stuff that you would use to run a station. There's also a couple of levels up there. There's 3 levels up there, and they're pretty rare now. They actually use those. They look like large carpenter well levels to make sure that the 2 rails were level, or it had the degree that they were looking for back and forth. But there were lots of tools that were needed to maintain the railroads, and I just felt it would be fitting that we would have examples of those. The hoops that you see up in the wall were used at the stations as the train would go through, and if it didn't stop, then the station master would tie the orders of the day or any mail or anything on one of those hoops, and the engineer would stick his hand out of the cab as he slowly went through and would grab the hoop with the messages attached to it, and then drop the hoop back down for the next train. So there were just lots of different things that were needed to maintain an active railroad, and I just thought it was important that to see the other side of it besides just looking at the toy trains.
Absolutely. Now, this is a lot of manual labor that would be entailed with all this stuff. Are some of these things done by machines and computers now?
There are now. When they lay track, the track that we have down at the Railroad Museum, a lot of those are 16 and 24 feet long. They have track now that's over a quarter of a mile long, and it's fed out of the back of a train. They can almost do everything in one motion now. There's a couple of machines. There's one in North America and there's one in Europe that literally does. It goes through and prepares the ballast. It puts down the ties. It lays the rail and tamps it to the finished product. But a lot of it is done with automation now, though there still is a lot of hard work and labor out doing maintenance and routine stuff, straightening rails and stuff like that.
Well, now we made our way up actually to the train room. As you can see, all the trains going around. We're going to talk to Mr. Ham over there, Willard Ham, who's an electrician, in a couple minutes. But first of all, let's talk about what's going on here. How long did it take you to get all of this train system set up?
Well, this train system actually came from about 3 or 4 different areas. The board, the first board you see here was a board that was constructed in the early 1970s, and it was a mobile board that Willard and several other people took out into these local communities and showed, like in shopping centers and stuff. It didn't have all the accessories that are on it now. It was because it was mobile. It broke into pieces, and they had to set it up and take it down. But some of that came from that layout, and then the other layouts were the boards themselves came from another gentleman in Harrodsburg, Mr. LaFawn Darlin, and we combined a lot of his accessories with some other accessories, and then I could buy my collection. So it's really a collection of a number of people. And then Alona Burdett from over in Lebanon, her brother passed away a couple of years ago up east, and she gave me his entire collection. Oh, wow. So it's all intertwined in here too. So what you've got is train cars from as early as 1901 right up until, we have a few that are current, but most are not. Most everything you see here, none of the accessories are newer than about 1959. So almost everything that you see is an antique. And some of it, over 100 years old.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, he said that Lionel trains started being made in 1900, right?
1900 was when the first Lionel was made, and they still make them today.
Right. And you have 2 that are on display here, 2 shelving units that are actually in the original Lionel trains. They had a little wider gap for their tracks, right?
They had called it a standard gauge, and it was wider than what we have now on the old 27 and the old gauge. They still make standard gauge trains, but these are that engine over there is 1901. That's the oldest engine I have out of over 100 engines.
Okay, and then the rest of them are from like 1903 is when they started doing the gauge that we were seeing here.
The old gauge, yes. And so we've got a lot of different trains. The all-metal train down here was in the late 1920s. It's just a conglomeration of all the accessories and the trains. mostly from the 30s, 40s, and 50s is most of it.
Now, also, right on the track here, we have the train that you've owned the longest, right? Because that was from your 4th birthday or Christmas?
That was Christmas 1952.
Okay.
It was my fourth birthday, and Santa Claus brought that, and he left a note and said, "Take very good care of this." So here it is, still the center point of my collection.
I think you lived up to his request.
Well, we're still working at it.
Yes,
yeah, it
exactly.
still works great.
Now, some of them we saw a couple minutes ago, you have steam engines as well as electric, right?
Right. We have steam engines, and they were prevalent on the railroads up until about 1940. They started making diesels. And then by about 1955, it almost had totally switched over from steam to diesel. Now they're starting to restore some of the original steam engines and bringing them back for excursions and stuff like that. We're doing one down at the Kentucky Railroad Museum, L&N 152, and it had its 100th birthday recently and had to be taken out of service until it got a complete overhaul.
Now, speaking of the 152, we actually have a picture on the wall here of one of the last passenger trains with 152, right? Right by St. Charles Church in Marion County.
Going through St. Charles there, and that was taken by the photographer. I think he was the editor of the Marion.
Enterprise.
Yes, the Enterprise, and I think that was the last passenger train that went on the Lebanon route before the tracks were taken up, and I think it was around 1983. I may be off a year or so, but it was right in that time.
Now, here in Harrodsburg, where you're set up, the last passenger train here was in 73, right?
Right, in 73, and the train that went through Harrodsburg was the Southern Railway, and today that is the Norfolk Southern. We've got the families on the wall, as you'll see in your shots. Many of the railroads have ceased to exist, and they've all been combined. This is Norfolk Southern, which is really a combination of about 25 railroads that preceded it into its present configuration today. There's 7 major railroads in North America today. There's 5 in the United States, Class 1 railroads, and 2 in Canada. But there's hundreds of railroads, but the big ones would be like Norfolk Southern, the CSX, the Burlington Northern, the Union Pacific. Those are your larger railroads, and then the Canadian Pacific and the Canadian National. But there's hundreds of short lines. You know, Paducah and Louisville has almost 400 miles of track between Paducah and Louisville, including into the western Kentucky coal fields and stuff.
Wow. So we're going to get a chance to talk to Willard Him, who is the electrician who's operating this for us here, and find out how this all works.